Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science. Guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.
Welcome to a very special episode of Honest Money. I'm a little bit intimidated, to be very honest, because this is the amateur now speaking to the absolute media professional. So I'm going to be even more stumbling and stuttering than normal. I'm thrilled to introduce Gugulethu Mfuphi. She is a financial journalist, broadcaster of world renown, I have to say, and I've had the privilege of sharing the stage with her a few times, and primarily in her capacity as a conversation strategist. Gugulethu, thanks so much for coming on to Honest Money with us.
Thank you so much, Warren. I must say I'm excited to be here and humbled by your introduction, but I think you and I are fairly comfortable in this medium now. So I've learned a lot from you, by the way, following your journey.
Thank you very much. So conversation strategist, let's start with that for our listeners who wouldn't be familiar with that role. Maybe you can tell us a bit more.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Warren. Well, I must say it's not a title that many South Africans might be familiar with, or individuals the world over, really. But the genesis of it was really started by a colleague of mine who, the two of us really do work that is incredibly similar. And we've actually worked together extensively through a number of projects. Nozipho Shabalala, who coined the phrase as a conversation strategist. And essentially, this stems from the art of the work that we do. Fundamentally, whether you're emceeing a corporate event for a company and trying to deliver a specific message, or trying to assist them in celebrating or commemorating particular awards, or if you happen to be moderating a key conversation, the ultimate objective is to plant a seed to lead to a conversation that will be consequential. And these conversations are not just structured in random questions and themes that are answered or rather asked to industry experts, but it's really a deliberate science to make sure that at the end of the day, the kind of questions, the level of engagement, how it is that we interact with the panelists as well as the client themselves, all translates into meeting the needs and objective of the client to be clear in their messaging, but also for that messaging to lead to a consequence where there's a change in action. So whether it's speaking to policymakers to alert them of certain changes that have been taking place, like we saw during COVID-19, whether it's speaking to an audience like the ones that we're speaking to today about an understanding of financial behaviors or the economic environment that we're in. Ultimately, what we're trying to do is to plant the seed through conversation to lead to actions of consequence. And the art behind it is a full engagement between myself as a conversation strategist as well as working with clients, where we look to partner in not only just sharing messages, but making sure that those messages do translate into action and accountability that can be followed through with. So, yeah, I guess there is a science to speaking after all.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something most of us do more or less every day, and the issue is how do we do it well? And then when we've got important things to talk about, how do we do it in a way that's approachable for our audience and the people that need to hear the message. So, if you get any of those around how to make Eskom better, please just give me a shout. I've got some ideas for you.
I like that. For you and I both, right, Warren? Shoo, it's tough times. No water, no power, but hopefully something else does work in South Africa's economy.
Yeah, we have wonderful, dynamic people and usually brilliant weather, and I think that counts for a lot. So let's get into it. I think it's always interesting for me to talk to you from the perspective that you have had so much exposure over a long period of time to lots of people who would be sitting usually on the other side of a screen, a microphone, a camera, where you need to kind of get into the the world of money with them in all different aspects. And I guess over that time you would have built up some learnings around money and especially money in the media space. And I think that's what I really wanted to talk about, but also just to say, and you and I were chatting off air, is that you're not putting yourself out there as some investment strategist, financial guru where you've got all the lessons for the world. This is really about what you've learned over the time, your own experiences, and it's what you're willing to share with us, which I really appreciate.
Oh, certainly. And I'm hoping that, as you correctly state, that some of these observations, lessons, and interactions, might plant a seed for us to look at our money differently, look at how we interact with money differently, and how various stakeholders do discuss money, and if the impact that we're trying to reach, which is an improvement of financial literacy to change people's behavior, actually does translate to that. So you're right. I'm looking forward to this. I'm anxious myself, but I think I'm going to relish in the delight of sharing my views.
So, if you had to take a theme from people that we perceive as financially successful, what have you observed around them? That kind of strikes you from someone who actually, or let's say, a collection of people that are financially successful versus those that aren't.
Very true. Interesting one there, Warren. And in my interactions, having interviewed a number of people within that particular space, largely being business executives, leaders of corporate activity, but also the beauty of actually speaking to individuals who are successful in their own personal capacities. What I found is that I think that there's one common thread: discipline, consistency, and a very clear understanding of what their end goal and objective is. And having observed, some of the conversations we have with a lot of corporate executives, whilst we're well aware that they earn copious amounts of income through their bonuses as well as corporate incentives and share schemes that they might be invested in, they perhaps aren't very open, about their money behaviors and money management. But those who have been very clear about the fact that, an increased level of and capability to derive greater income does provide them with more opportunities and flexibility when it comes to the choices that they're able to make. And what I've also found is that through my own career in interacting with individuals who have a heightened sense of financial discipline, is that sometimes it's not about the assets that you're able to acquire. And I guess not assets might not be the right word that I'm using here, but it's not about how flamboyant you are or lavish you are in actually demonstrating or showcasing your wealth. But there's a great sense of the discipline, which speak to the consistency which is also built up on a heightened level of awareness. And what I found with a few individuals, particularly some of our listeners on some of the platforms I've worked on, is a simplicity to their formula, that it doesn't need to be overly complex. It doesn't need to distract them entirely, but it needs to be easy for them to understand and so much easier than for them to implement. And those are always factors I think that have stuck out for me because, again, the narrative around being fairly wealthy or accumulating some sense of wealth in South Africa has been that it needs to be intricate, complex, loaded with lots of money that's involved, and of course, some assets that you acquire that not only generate the kind of capital appreciation that you require, but assets that you can also show off and point to. And what I found is that there's also this subliminal simplicity to individuals who have been disciplined in creating wealth there, Warren.
I love that point. I often get quite a bit of heat on social media when I kind of point out, for me, one of the things that bothers me about wealth is that those that really have, accumulated real wealth are often they fly below the radar. They're not flamboyant. They're not extravagant. And those that are generating a lot of income, but actually, might also have a lot of debt, they tend to be much more flamboyant with their money. They're the ones driving the most expensive cars, wearing the most outrageous, outfits with all the latest accessories that are obviously expensive. And when I kind of raise that as an issue to say, well, hang on, why is it that the millionaires and let's not talk about the billionaires because there's so few of them, but the millionaires are often silent. There might be, there's even books about that, the millionaire next door. There are people that might be sitting right next to you, I want to say in the wimpy, eating their burger like I would be, and not not in the most expensive restaurants. And it's interesting that a lot of people really don't respond well to that. They don't want that to be pointed out. They want to know that the wealthy are out there and showing themselves to be wealthy. And I just don't think it's true. My observation is in fact it's exactly the opposite.
That's very true. You're very right, and it's almost as though it's I wouldn't like to use the word sense of secrecy, but as you say, just limited exposure to understanding the simplicity that might be involved around creating wealth. And I think that is a concept that we also need to decipher in South Africa. But I must say, Warren, over the last few years, you and I have had the opportunity to see this growth in social media, and it's been phenomenal to witness the kind of conversations that ordinary South Africans and retail investors have been having on varying platforms, from YouTube to Twitter, including Instagram and a few others, where we've been very vocal about, how best we can actually make money. And individuals have been very bold about talking about how to manage debt. There's been a heightened level of community that's grown in terms of retail investing, and using easy to access and affordable platforms to also build wealth. So I do see that changing slightly, particularly with this generation of millennials, as well as Gen Zs, who are kind of caught in between, wanting to live it up lavishly, and show their wealth off to the world, but at the same time trying to educate one another about the various avenues and asset classes that one can actually look to, when it comes to investing specifically. So I think there might be a slight change in the tide, even though there might be a few reality checks that many South Africans are not quite comfortable to face just yet.
And I do think that one of the arguments I will buy is we all need examples of our own heroes. I don't really like the idea of always holding out, the typical American, financial success story. I think it's important that we've got, local South African success stories, people that are our neighbors and, grow up where we grew up, and, if not in our neighborhood, in our city, and where we can see, the future, and we can hold ourselves out to aim for something. So I get that we shouldn't be, we shouldn't be shy about success, but I think just be careful how we measure success would maybe be my message. And I think it's a nice pivot to people that don't kind of earn real, predictable basic salaries. I think there's this whole thing around entrepreneurship, the gig economy, and then I guess also in your industry, there's a huge expectation of media personalities to be kind of high flyers and out there, in the biggest restaurants, the best cars, the best outfits, and when you've got, I think, unpredictable income. Must be a pretty scary way to live, and let's not talk about you specifically. That's a bit close to home, but I think your industry is it's a tough place to be when you're especially a broadcaster where you're on contract and life is good 1 week or 1 month or 1 year, and then suddenly that contract's over, it doesn't get extended, and then life isn't so good anymore.
Very true. You hit the nail on the head there, Warren. And there are a number of facets you touch on that really do hit very close to home. And maybe let me start off with the asset purchases before moving into the media space, which has been incredibly volatile, especially as we've also moved out of COVID, despite the fact that it has been an industry and a sector that has been rattled by, I guess, a lack of financial discipline and keeping up appearances, really. We comment on it very lightly about keeping up with the Joneses, but it's a real concept. And more so, as a Black South African, Warren, I appreciate that we, have a very unfortunate history in South Africa. And over the last 20 odd years, many South Africans right across the board, Black South Africans specifically, and even, I guess, individuals who come from more impoverished backgrounds have been trying to catch up. And what we've noticed, if you look at a number of studies that have been released recently, KFM partnered with UCT and Liberty on their most recent study into the Black middle class of South Africa. And they separate the market into about 3 categories. Individuals who are the forerunners or front runners, the first in their generation and in their family really to break through, and really accumulate some kind of asset. And they call those individuals who participate in the asset catch-up. So they've got a good education, they've managed to buy their first home, they've bought the nice flashy car, and they are potentially also responsible for paying back via black tax, which actually comes from a very emotive and family-oriented drive. And then you have individuals like myself who are second generation. I am fortunate enough to have spent half my life in the township, and throughout my life, my parents have been hardworking individuals who did their best to take me to the best schools, Model C schools back then, and also gave me a very comfortable life if I really have to compare it with a few other individuals. And that makes me a third generation, I guess, individual in South Africa who is in the space of trying to continue with the accumulation of wealth for future generations. And these are individuals who are going beyond, buying properties and houses just to attest their claim, but individuals who rightfully, as you say, are keen to explore new avenues. So you get your education, but perhaps you don't follow through. I mean, I studied accounting. I'm glad I'm not a CA and a bean counter. I think my job in the media space is a lot more fun, but it does speak to the volatility of the workplace and work environment that I'm in. And you are 100% correct, Warren. I acknowledge and appreciate that I work in the media. And I guess because I'm in the more serious side of media slightly, as some of my peers might consider it, I've never really felt the pressure to be flashy, to be seen in the latest car or in the latest gear. But I must admit, I am a typical South African female who likes some nice things. But of course, given my exposure to the realm of financial journalism, I've been able to pick up a few lessons as to how to enjoy some of the nice things in life in a manner that I can afford. And I must tell you a very interesting story, Warren. It was at the time when I was working at MoneyWeb. This is probably 2012, 2013, so almost a decade ago. And I recall my colleague and mentor and boss at the time was Alec Hogg. And we'd obviously talk about the markets, have engagement about, investment opportunities and the likes. And he looked at me and he said, "Do you actually have any investments?" And I looked back and I said, "Well, I know my dad has a unit trust for me." And he said, "Okay, well, you've highlighted that, but what are you doing for yourself?" And between Alec as well as a colleague of mine, Dominique Sehwatle, who was the producer of one of the shows we produced at MoneyWeb, she literally helped me open up a Satrix account and said, "Look, 300 Rand every month, just toss it into an ETF and watch your money grow." And I've been very fortunate that as a financial journalist working within that space, that was the first time I opened up my own independent financial investment account, if I can put it that way. And through the years of ongoing exposure to new investment products, understanding the lay of the landscape, I've been able to, I guess, follow a very different trajectory to some of my peers, where I have been very considered in some of the financial decisions that I make, and even engaging with individuals like yourself, reading multiple books. You kind of get to understand, okay, you really need to follow a method, exercise patience, and a simple method to building your wealth. But what I have found is that this does work to the detriment of many of some of my other peers in the industry who, for lack of knowledge and a lack of understanding, some of the basics, how you get taxed as a freelancer, whether or not to continue as a sole proprietor or open up a company and a business account as a PTY Ltd. All of that really does speak to a lack of understanding, lack of exposure, sometimes fear, and a lack of clarity, I guess, as to what the end goal is. Being the leading media mogul is something quite fun in the long term, but I do think many of my peers in the industry might struggle with managing their finances most on a serious note, specifically for those who might not have the necessary exposure. But if anything, I do think that there's a growing tide and change to educate people to, whilst you're working in a side hustle and perhaps on a contract, to be very cognizant of where and how it is that you use your money, and being very, very resourceful in terms of making sure that you're not caught off guard. And I think if anyone had to learn that lesson, the COVID-19 pandemic and lockdown, geesh, I think that must have been a wake-up call for anyone who might have been caught off guard.
And I think it's it's such an important point that we don't know what the unpredictable event will be. We've got such a horrible but real example now from COVID, but these will happen again. I'm not saying a global pandemic will happen again. I hope it never does. But the big event that isn't predictable, that you can't in any way forecast or protect yourself against, will be around the corner. We need to know that's the case, and then then to say to ourselves, how do we invest our money, and how do we financially protect ourselves as best we can? So I'm going to prepare you while I wrap up on that point, because I always have one question, my favorite question for all of our guests, and that is, and I'll give you some time to think about it now, but what's the one lesson you would love to give your 21-year-old self, knowing what you know today, both about life and careers and money? It doesn't have to be very specific to personal finance. What's the one thing you would love to teach yourself, if you were to meet yourself now? I know it's not possible, but it's always my favorite question. And then I think, just to give you time to think about that, my one big learning from this is, we can all go along with money and allow life to happen. and allow things to happen to us. But it's amazing that if we prepare and we prepare for bad times and give ourselves financial protection, and that could be as simple as get 6 months of your expenses in an emergency fund. Just give yourself some financial protection against the unforeseen. But the moment you give yourself the protection, somehow you don't need it as often and as much as if you have you take no protection. You give yourself no financial kind of savvy around these things. And that failure to plan and failure to prepare, for both people in the media and those who are on contract work or doing hourly gigs or whatever it is. That's a global phenomenon. I mean, it's very likely that there's a global music megastar, Shakira, might end up in jail because of failure to kind of sort out her taxes. It's right around the world. Lots of soccer stars have got themselves into deep trouble with this stuff. So the reality is, if you are earning well and you are in part-time work, you need to know that the tax man is always watching, and don't react and don't respond. Rather get proactive and get your house in order up front. It might be boring, might sound really adult and really grown up to do it, but getting a letter from SARS that says you owe them a heck of a lot of money is much more scary than just being prepared. So Gugulethu, my favorite question: if you had to meet your 21-year-old self, what would you want to teach her now?
Thanks for that, Warren. Yeah, your last question is actually very thought-provoking, right? Because 21 is so often an age where we think that we've matured and developed into adulthood, and yet in hindsight, one actually realizes that it's a very young age, and that a lot of individuals might not have the mental and emotional capacity to actually deal with some of the tough decisions that one needs to take in life. So for me, I guess 2 things, maybe 3. The first one that I'd probably tell myself at the age of 21, I had already started working after graduating and was pursuing my postgraduate qualification. And the first thing I would say to myself, I was in the thick of things, had fallen in love, working and enjoying life really, but very curious as to what my future would hold. And I guess I'd tell my 21-year-old self to relax, not to stress about the future, because the truth is at 21, you're going to experience different versions of yourselves. You'll be someone different with different experiences at 25. At 30, you'll evolve and become somebody new. And at 35, you'll be different. I'm not quite there yet, but I think if anything, at 21, just know that you're going to meet various versions of yourself, and that you're going to grow, you're going to evolve, and you're going to learn more about yourself. So that would be the first lesson. And in learning more about yourself, it takes away from feeling as though one needs to be married to a particular view of life and their experiences. So know that you'll grow, that you'll evolve, and be comfortable with that, and be comfortable with losing people along that journey and meeting new ones as well. People will shape your journey in different forms. And then I also think a very important one is whilst you're on the right direction financially, be more consistent in your journey to accumulate wealth, to purchase assets, and to protect them. I think that would also be a key driver to a 21-year-old, but also use money to fulfill yourself more with experiences and with knowledge versus just materialistic things. It's not a mistake that I think I made, but in hindsight, my 21-year-old self obviously had a lot more time, a lot more flexibility, and I do think I could have used that time more wisely to capitalize on opportunities and experiences that I otherwise might not have enjoyed. So I guess that's my key takeaway to my 21-year-old self.
Gugulethu Mfuphi, thank you so much for joining us. That was just a brilliant episode. I think the time absolutely flew, and I actually learned so much just from listening to you, and I really appreciate all your willingness to share with us your learnings and your experience. So great to have you on the show. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Brought to you by Prescient Investment Management. Informed by science, guided by insight. Prescient Investment Management is an authorized FSP.